You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Proteum Machining, and this week I'm joined by James Milne of 5050 Knives. Welcome, James.
How you going, mate?
Doing well. Thanks for joining me and taking the time.
No, it's my pleasure.
So, where can people find you online? What does 5050 Knives do real quick, and then we'll dive into your backstory.
So you can find me online at 5050knives.com, just the business name.com, and I am a small self-taught machine shop specializing in high-end kitchen cutlery and other sharp implements here in Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah, some seriously lust-worthy knives, too. If you guys don't follow him, please go over 5050 with the first 50 spelled out and the second as numbers. Absolutely amazing. Like, I started following you, I can't remember when, but man, every time I see something come out of your shop, I'm like, oh, I wish you were closer so I could just, like, I'm sure importing them would be a nightmare, but like, I want one so bad.
Oh, no, I send all over the world, and majority of the actual buyers are from the States and Europe. Everyone seems to have bigger wallets outside of Australia.
Well, in that case, I will have to put that on my list because, man, they are just gorgeous.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a love project. You go broke pretty quick spending this much time, trying to perfect things and teaching yourself all the skills you need. Obviously, I didn't, do a trade or have anyone to teach me, so I've just had to learn by consistently failing and hoping to learn from said failures.
Well, speaking of that, let's get into your backstory. How did you get into all of this? How did you start machining?
So I left the army pretty mentally and physically broken back in mid-2014. I was a paratrooper with the RSS, which is Recon Snipers Surveillance Unit, and I have always had a love for cooking, and cooking is a fun time when you have a nice knife. It is a terrible time when you have a blunt, terrible knife. It's like getting into a nice car and having a memorable moment in a nice sports car. You're not having a memorable moment on your daily commute in your Toyota Corolla. So that's kind of how I look at it that way. And so when I got out, I bought a chef knife called a Global. Everyone's probably pretty familiar with them. They're meant to be pretty good, and they're a couple $100. And I was pretty devastated. It lasted like a week, and I was like, "What is going on?" It was chipping out and wouldn't sharpen properly. So I was like, "You know what? Screw it. I'm gonna teach myself how to make a knife just for the fun of it." So YouTubed and Googled, and there's heaps of people hand making knives and such. So that's what I got into. I got into hand forging knives for a few years. And the company I did that under is Nyati Blades. So that's Nyati. That is Shona. That's my local dialect from my country back in Zimbabwe in Africa.
Oh, really?
And it means Cape Buffalo. So that's kind of my favorite animal. Anyways, that's the logo, and that's the name of my said previous brand. And I was forging high-end chef knives, slowly learning while studying architecture. And it got so busy, I was 3 years in back orders.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really good. On paper, that sounds amazing. It's yeah, sick. That's heaps of money coming in. Not really, because usually there's anywhere between 100 to 300 hours in each knife.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because you're trying to perfect it. You want it to be absolutely perfect so that person who's buying that item has that for the rest of their life, and they can then pass it down to their kids. We're not about making throwaway items at all. So yeah, it's definitely a love thing. But then when you put it on paper, it's holy moly, I'm spending 300 hours plus on this knife, and I'm selling it for $1,000. There's just no financial gain to be made. And it got to the stage where I got pretty bad RSI on my wrist from swinging a hammer every day, and it actually crushed my hand in the army in a parachuting accident, among other things. So it was starting to really take a toll. So I was like, you know what? Surely there is a better way to make these knives and still make them to the same standard, if not better, without as much human labor. So I could obviously lower the cost and get more out there to keep up with demand. So I was like researching, looking at different things, and back in like 2015, not like there wasn't that many people machining knives that was accessible. Like you've got John from John Grimsby Knives. Who else? I had Alan. He helped me a lot. He's in the States. I forget his Instagram handle. One sec. Give him a shout out because he helped me a heap.
Is he also making
He makes
pocket
folding
knives?
knives.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's AMH Knives. His name's Alan Hollaback. Really nice dude. That dude gave me so much time on helping me build my first CNC mill. So I took like a milling machine and fully converted it to CNC.
Wow.
And
And that's how
I
you
had,
started?
yeah, that's how I started. I had absolutely no idea about machining. Like my dad was a tool maker, but he wasn't around to help. But yeah, Alan really helped out. Had heaps of time, you know, plug this in here, do that, do this. We're using a controller called Centroid,
Hmm.
and basically the first knife I milled was my petty. It's a small kitchen knife, and I was hard milling that in my office, like at
Wow.
home.
That's
Um,
nuts.
and really quickly outgrew that to the stage I was like, wow, I've actually like screwed up here. I've spent like 6 months messing around with this, building this, and it now I'm like completely outgrown it like almost instantly.
And so
So
what year was this?
this was 2017, I'd say. Yeah,
Okay, so not too long
2017.
ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. And then the first machine I got was a really old drill mill tap, a bit like a Speedio,
Hmm.
but about like nearly 2 tons heavier.
Oh, wow.
BT40 had a full pallet changer and stuff. It was like $5,000, but it was absolutely trashed. Had been machining graphite and cast iron all its life. So it's
Oh,
actually like
no.
there's heaps of photos of it if you like scroll down on my Instagram all the way to the bottom, of me like repairing that and rebuilding it and cleaning it
Yeah,
and
I'm
yada yada.
looking at it
And
right now. The Argo or
yeah,
something?
the Argo, yeah, it was a brilliant machine. Like it had such a good base. Like I wish I actually had more time and money, and I would have rebuilt that machine because the foundation on it was awesome. Like, there's not many like 4 ton mill taps out there that are like that rigid.
So
Yeah,
back then, what was your workflow like? Because I'm looking at like the Nitro V petties you had then. Were
yep.
you just cutting out the shape of them on the CNC, or were you actually profiling the or
Profiling,
certain?
milling, doing all the bevels, everything, and
Oh,
then
wow.
I'm making the handles and then hand finishing. So even my knives now, you'll see some photos and they come off pretty amazing. Like the bevels are so dialed in now. The surface finishes are that nice that I don't have to hand finish them, but there's lots of little things like blend lines and stuff that need polishing and tumbling that kind of just elevate that product to that next level.
Okay.
Um, and that's where 50/50 comes from. It's half machine.
Okay.
Yeah, that
So
was.
where did you go from the Argo? What was next after that?
So if you scroll up, you'll see the next machine is still one of my favorite machines. That was a huge Decal Maho
Hmm.
DMG high speed gantry 12.5 ton machine. So I went from this small Argo to this like insanely accurate, fast, gosh, if I crash this, I'm like ruined type of machine. And I got that pretty cheap because the company that was selling it had heaps of problems with it. So I was like, oh, I'll just take it on and I'll sit there and figure out how to like fix it. So that taught me a lot about machine maintenance.
Well, and
So
that's kind of a common theme it seems like in your career.
yeah. So like, I would love to have a few million in the bank and just buy all new machines and be done with it, and then go on holiday every holidays. But we're not there yet. So I've got to get machines where I can. And here in Australia, machines are insanely expensive. We aren't lucky like everyone in the States and Europe where you've got so much to choose from, so prices are pretty low. Here, you've got machines from like the 90s that are still like 60 grand.
Right, right. Yeah, it
Like,
seems to be
it's
a common
absurd.
theme with like even Clive, who was a past guest in South Africa,
Yep,
lamented about a similar thing where it was like, well, there's only so many machines coming into the country, so we
100%.
got to take what you can get, kind of thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like a lot of the manufacturing here in Australia is there's not that much high end aerospace, medical. that are bringing in machines all the time. They usually bring them in and they run them into the ground because the import costs are just so high, and the time to bring a machine from, say, Europe into Australia, it takes so long compared to, the more developed world like Europe and America and such.
Right.
So
So you
it's very
had
slim
that.
pickings.
You had the DMG, right? I
Yep.
guess it was, and then how did you go from that to the? Is it tongue tie?
Yeah, tongue tie. Yeah. So I fully rebuilt that DMG. I've rebuilt all the hydraulic unit, the hydraulic lines, all the pneumatic system, replaced the spindle bearings. Like, quite a bit of work I did on that, just figuring it all out and getting it back up to scratch. And I then sold that because I thought I was moving shops, but I didn't end up actually moving shops. But sold that for 3 times the price that I paid.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I basically just like flipped machines. So we started with like a $2,000 milling machine and kind of just bought low, flipped sort of thing. And then the tongue tie was a brand new machine. So that's very similar to your Speedio Robo Drill.
Right. So
Uh,
is Taiwanese and Chinese machinery easier to get in Australia
yeah,
due to proximity?
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
100%. A lot of people have either Chinese or Taiwanese machines here. Majority of the resellers are all Taiwanese or Chinese resellers. Highly rate the Taiwanese machines, like within a certain degree. Like that Tong Tai company, you can't fault them. I've seen robo drills and the way they're designed. A lot of their like internal layouts have a lot of like chip management issues. Like chips get packed up in certain spots. It was never an issue with the Tong Tai, and like a new spindle on a Tong Tai for a dual contact BT30 was like 3.5 grand.
Oh wow.
It's like it makes so much more financial sense for Australians to invest in that brand of machine and get spare parts than, say, a DMG where there is no DMG tech. There's like
Oh geez. So you have to fly
DMG.
somebody out if
Yeah,
you
you got to
really need
fly
something.
somebody out. So there used to be a DMG tech here in Brisbane, but he left. And so now there is literally no DMG Brisbane, from my knowledge. So you've got to fly techs up from, say, Melbourne, like 2.5 hours away, pay for all their flights, accommodation, hourly rate, there and back. It just is, yeah, it's hard.
Oh yeah, I understand. I mean, that's one reason we sold our Kitamura was if we wanted somebody to come look at the control side of it, the nearest place was in California, and so it was I don't know $2,000 just to start. We fly them
Yep,
out, hotel, per diem, rental car, all that stuff.
yep. It's just nuts. I just don't understand how that business model works for them in these countries, but I guess financially it works for them because their biggest user base is Europe. Yeah, it's hard to buy things these days that don't have after sale support.
Okay, so how is the business doing at this point? You said that you were like a year behind when you were hand doing.
Yep.
Now that you had this machinery, were you starting to catch up? And
Yeah, so we're almost like completely caught up on all our orders. There was about 260 something orders to catch up from the start of the year, and it's been a punish. Like, it was been a much bigger undertaking than I thought it was going to be. I just assumed, I'm going to upgrade to these nice newer machines and things are going to be swell, but every machine has its gremlins and there's a massive learning curve.
oh yeah,
Lots of, I have a thing called the misery bucket, and there's lots of knives in there that haven't passed the grade and just kind of get chucked.
I bet.
Uh,
Yeah. So I guess stepping back, what where did you go from the tongue tie?
so from the tongue tie, I sold that for double what I paid.
You weren't
Uh,
kidding. It is a habit.
yeah, yeah, and that was literally just a supply and demand thing. So I got that machine basically half the retail price, but brand new at the time because there was an influx of Taiwanese machines in Australia. No one was interested in buying, and the reseller was like, I need to move this. It's a show model. So he literally gave it to me for half price. So I was pretty stoked. And then come last year, I sold it for double that. And that was literally, I had about 6 people kind of fighting over it because there was no machines in the country, COVID, you know, all the medical side had kicked up. People are doing lots of work for ventilation and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I went to some sort of like plastic injection molding place, and
I didn't realize it was that recent that you sold it.
yeah, I sold it last year, just before I moved into this new shop. So I moved
Okay.
into this shop about a year ago.
So yeah, let's talk about that whole process of the move and the new shop, and then also the machines you ended up picking up.
All right, so yeah, so I sold the tongue tie, and at the same sort of time, the people that I'd originally bought my DMG from, I guess, knew I was pretty handy with fixing, European machines, and they had the Micron up for sale and said, are you interested in buying it? So I was like, yeah, shit, yeah. I've been pestering you for years about it. It's just such a well thought out, beautiful machine. The finishes that come off it are just impeccable. So I bought that, and then just so happened that another person I was speaking to at the time, I became friends with, their company was selling basically a nearly unused Akuma. It's a twin pallet, 3-axis vertical, an Akuma MF46VA with all the bells and whistles, super knobs, 50 tool changer, higher RPM spindle, yada yada yada. And I was like, wow, so I've got two high-end machines now and absolutely nowhere to put them in, because they're both like 10 to 12 ton machines each, and real
Jeez.
estate isn't really easy to come by for shops here in Brisbane. Everything's kind of, so yeah, I just got lucky at this place. It was like 3 times the rental price that my previous space was. So that was pretty scary taking that on. Yeah, I moved into here and did months and months of like the build up, moving everything in, organizing everything, getting the machines hooked up. And then I was basically told the machines were working because I bought them sight unseen. They came from different parts of the country. Yeah, as you can probably tell, or if people have been following me, it's been just nightmare after nightmare of things breaking and fault finding, and yeah, it's been a punish. The Micron came, like, they ended up selling the Micron to me super cheap because it had an issue where when it moved to the front right hand corner of the table, it would vibrate, so the whole machine would shake. And I was like, that's weird. So is it like a ball screw issue? They obviously had their Micron reseller come out and look at it and like, yeah, it's a ball screw issue. There's X amount of vibration in it. So they wanted like, I was like 60 to 80 grand to replace a ball screw in it. So I took a really big risk getting that
Ooh.
Micron. I was like, either it's not the ball screw issue and it's something else, or it's the ball screw and we'll look at that later. I'll just use like the top left-hand side of the table for now. So I sat there for a few weeks and it actually turned out to be a PLC issue.
That's what I was going to say. It sounds like a servo tuning kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's exactly what it was. So I sat there for ages looking at it, checking forums, like diving into the PLC, teaching myself that sort of stuff. And it turns out when Micron had delivered that machine, the reseller had actually like messed up their PLC and changed a few settings. And they had basically removed all the servo tuning for the x-axis. Sorry, for the y-axis. So
Oh
it
my
wasn't actually
goodness.
the x-axis that was the issue; it was the y-axis when it came to that certain spot on the gantry. And yeah, I just had to basically adjust a few numbers, and the problem was completely solved.
Well, I'm glad it was something relatively simple. I mean, it sounds like you had
Yeah.
to learn a lot, but still,
Let's just
servo
say,
tuning is a giant thing.
yeah, I cracked open a pretty good bottle of whiskey that night, and I was like so stoked with myself. I was like, "You're a fucking genius," and everyone's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yes, I am."
So tell me about your third machine too, because if you look, I mean, me looking back on your Instagram, it seems like you bought a lathe and then decided to stick it at the back of your shop and then very quickly had to hoist it over all of your
Yeah,
machines.
so that lathe was a really nice machine. It was just a real simple 2-axis lathe, and I actually got that included with the sale of the Akuma.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
They were like, we're clearing. They were actually getting Kearns in at the time. They're a pretty big medical company here in Australia. But budget to them is there's no budget. Just get what we need. So
Yeah,
they
if you
had,
say Kearns multiple,
yeah,
that's not
plural.
a
Yeah,
small budget.
yeah. So they needed to clear floor space, and they're like, buy the Akuma and we'll throw the lathe in for free. I was like, say no more. And yeah, the crane lift, the we had to get like a 25-ton crane, like a Frenner, to basically lift it 3 meters in the air, 3.5 meters in the air, and up and over the two machines through a little gap in between electrical cables. It was pretty sketchy to get it out of the shop, but yeah, some pretty good riggers here in Brizzy that I've been using for years. Sold that, and that basically paid for the Akuma.
Oh wow, that's
So
killer.
it's like, yeah, it paid for the cost of the Akuma and the rigging and all that sort of stuff. So I basically got the Akuma for $0.
Jeez, that's amazing.
Very,
So
very lucky, yeah.
we've been kind of dancing around it, but our first listener question was from Design the Everything, and he asked, "Was it worth buying used machines, and would you buy
100%.
used again?"
110%.
Okay, so speaking of that, let's go through the gamut of all the things you've had to repair on both, because it like secondhand, I get so excited for you every time you post, and you're like, "I got this one!" Like you had the
Yep.
door on the Micron, you had
Yep.
three things on the Akuma. So let's go through those and the stories behind them.
Yep. Okay, so like I look at it this way of living well below your means, like in everything in my life. Buy secondhand this, secondhand that. Don't buy the latest, newest thing. Don't get into debt. Try and run your shop below your monthly quota and put money away where you can. Obviously, every month that's not, applicable. Some people have bigger budgets. Some people have, different accuracy needs. I'm just making knives, so buying secondhand machines for me, as long as it makes nice knives and the surface quality is good, I'm pretty happy. But yeah, I don't see the point in buying a brand new machine for the type of work I do and then having this monthly repayment and stress of like, oh, I need to make X amount just to cover that, then rent, and then make a profit. So I'd much rather buy something cheap that needs fixing up, spend the time fixing it up. Even though I hate myself for it, I'm like, man, I'm never getting a secondhand machine again. Like, you're an idiot. Why would you do this like a fifth time? But I don't know, there's a bit of like an allure to it of like that accomplishment at the end of like, all right, this was pretty messed up. I fixed it. Now it's making really good parts.
Totally. Well, and like you said, you're your own tech. Like you kind of have to be, and so the fact that
100%,
you've
yeah.
accomplished all of that is amazing.
Yeah, so for the Micron, gosh, we had so many issues. Apart from that servo issue, we had a hydraulic power pack issue with the drawbar. So the drawbar for the tool release on the HSK 50 spindle is hydraulically driven. That was like toast, and let's just say it's multiple figures for a new one out of Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't happening. So I was like, I'm just going to learn how to rebuild hydraulics, and deep dived onto YouTube, like School of YouTube, and rebuilt it. All new seals, all new lines, and luckily it just started working. And I was like, oh wow, well that saved me a lot of money. Spent a few weeks fixing it and learning, but now I've got a skill. Now I can maintain that part and know I've repaired it to a certain standard, and I'll know now if it's getting below that standard. We had stuff like the tool release button not working. That was like never working for the previous company that bought it new. I don't know what happened. They must have just gotten a dodgy machine, or they just had dodgy staff that broke everything.
Because that was a pretty easy fix, if I remember right, wasn't it?
Which was that? Sorry.
The tool release button.
Yeah, it was something so dumb. Like, when you like buy a machine, like, oh yeah, this is gonna work. You just assume something as dumb as like a tool release button is gonna work. Nah, it wasn't working. It was like fully covered with coolant all up in the lines. It was shorting the machine out, and it just took me for ages to figure it out because I wasn't really that good with testing for shorts and stuff like that. I hadn't really done much of that before. So my dad's a aircon refrigeration mechanics, done sparky work. He came and helped, and he found it in like 5 minutes. I was like, yeah, wow, I feel dumb. So we just, I 3D printed a part for it, put a new button in, rewired it, sealed it, and now it works flawlessly. I was like, so there's little small things that stop the machine because it won't allow you to change tools if it thinks there's a tool in the spindle when there is no tool in the spindle. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it'll come up with a code saying emptying spindle. So it wants to take that said tool in the spindle, put it into an empty pocket, then grab a new tool.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to actually like tell it, hey, actually there's no tool in the spindle when there isn't one. So it was just stuck. It just wouldn't work. So until we fixed that button, that machine was dead in the water.
Oh goodness.
It's the weirdest thing. Yeah, I fixed that and now it's running flawlessly. Like I've had like some of my parts checked and a lot of like there's about 47 measurements on the knife, like tapered thickness measurements that I use, like geometry on the
Hmm.
gutos. When I was making the gutos on the micron, we were holding around 5 plus or minus microns on edge thickness.
Wow, that's
Yeah, so I had that checked, and then I was pretty stoked. I was like, wow, that's a pretty accurate machine for like a non climate controlled shop.
right. Yeah, that's really impressive.
Yeah, because the entire casting is one solid piece of mineral epoxy granite.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't realize they weren't cast iron machines.
No, the whole like it's like it's like a H frame almost. So the
Hmm.
y-axis moves along the top, and it's completely supported by the epoxy granite, and then the X moves left to right. Yeah, that's the table. So the table only moves in X, and then the spindle moves on Y. So it's all completely supported by the epoxy granite. There's no actual like cast iron in the main build frame, the
Hmm.
chassis. And the Akuma, same thing. It has the same exact design. It's that like bridge type mill sort of construction, so it's super rigid. And that's epoxy and cast iron.
Okay, what year is that Akuma?
Hang on a sec. My dog's going nuts. Puppy life. The Micron is a Micron HSM 700, and it is 2007.
Okay.
And the Akuma is 2004.
Okay. Yeah, so they're not terribly old machines at all.
No, no, not at all. Whereas the Tong type beforehand was like brand new 2018 when I bought it in 2018.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So do you like, I guess, OSP and Heidenheim better than you liked Fanuc?
Will very begrudgingly never buy a Fanic ever again in my life.
That good, huh?
They are like a Toyota. They're super reliable, super easy to find people that know Fanic, like say to run it and fix it and such. But oh my god, does that make you want to pull your hair out with its absolutely spastic memory size?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No joke.
Like 21st century, we're using like kilobytes. You
Yeah.
know,
It's measured in
one
meters of tape.
like what? I think I
Yeah.
had on a brand new machine like 512 kilobytes of memory. Like
Hmm.
what? Like it's absurd. Like you plug a USB in, but you just can't run the program off the USB. You've got to copy the program from the USB via DNC to the main memory and like run it in like drip feed DNC mode. And if you're prototyping, you've got no way to really stop that program, inspect, restart the program without just really messing around with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Fanuc without a data server or the data server option is like
yep.
really hard to run.
Yeah, and they wanted like five something grand just to upgrade the memory. And then Fanic were really difficult because it wasn't a robo drill. They wouldn't come out and do the work. I'd have to
Oh,
get tongue
really?
tie to do the work.
Wow.
And it was just like, wow, this is such a letdown. And that is honestly the reason why I sold the machine was purely because of the control.
Makes sense.
Like a lot of my work is just, that consistent product refinement, prototyping, and you just can't beat Heidenhain. It's such a powerful, easy to use. I guess your mind isn't getting raped with stupid things like like low memory, like you are on Fanic. Heidenhain, you can just pause it, it'll stop. You can move the table around, move the spindle around, inspect your parts, close the door, press on, and it just picks up where it left off. Starts all your auxiliary stuff and just goes back to machining without any issues. OSP, that's been a pretty hard one to learn because it's got an OSP 100 in it and it's a pretty older control, but it's like that model has all the bells and whistles. I think it's got like a 2 terabyte hard drive in it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, same with the Micron. I think the Micron's a 1 terabyte hard drive, so it's all like just data linked wirelessly from my computer. So you can just send files over, and then it just stores it on the memory. Easy as, but that Akuma was an absolute nightmare to figure out how to access the what they call TC. It's their form of like in between hard drive where you've got to send your files through a program on your computer. I use like FileZilla, and you've then got to send it that way to the Akuma. But the annoying thing is, then from the Akuma, you've then got to send it from TC to your HD0, and it's just a lot of like double and triple handling. Whereas a Micron's one program, TNC Cremo, and it goes straight to the hard drive on the Micron, and you can run it straight from that. So it's a lot of little differences, and that's not so bad for like your workflow if you're doing like large scale manufacturing where you just one program and it runs forever. But if you're constantly changing little things, prototyping every day, doing like 100 whatever edits, that gets pretty time consuming.
Oh, I bet.
Sitting
Yeah.
there waiting for it to load, transfer, copy across, start, stop. So that's probably my only real gripe with the Akuma. But I've heard the new Akumas are really good, OSP 200s and 300s. I got a few friends that have got OSP 300s on their horizontals, and they just won't go back.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. So, speaking of, or going back to the things that were wrong with them, you also had the tool change door on the Micron that went bad,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That was
Gosh, that
heartbreaking to watch.
yeah, that day that happened, and I just said, "Oh, fuck it," and shut the machine down. I just sat on the floor with like a bottle of whiskey, literally on the shop floor with a straight bottle of whiskey, and I've never done that in my life. And I just sat there drinking whiskey for a few hours, just like venting.
But you figured it out.
Yeah. So I won't say how much they wanted for a new door out of Micron Direct, but it was around eight to 10 grand for a new door assembly. Like we're just talking pneumatic RAM, small pneumatic RAM, a piece of like 1.5 mil stainless sheet, and two brackets.
Oof. Yeah, they are a little proud of their stuff, that's for sure.
Yeah, I put in like a $200 air RAM and some laser cut stainless steel, and we were all fixed. It took it a long time to get it right because there's only about 3 millimeters of clearance on the right hand side of the y-axis for it to go into the tool changer area.
Mm-hmm.
So it was constantly rubbing. So you've got to tune the stroke limit on the in and out on the pneumatic, so the door opens enough so it clears, but closes enough so that like coolant and chips aren't getting in the tool changer area. So that was a lot of like swearing, stuck inside the machine, covered in oil and chips and all that jazz for a few, I guess, weeks. It was tuning that, and it was going to be a really quick fix. Like looking back on it, it's like 2 hours of work and it'd be fixed. But we bought a brand new pneumatic rod, and it came bent. Like the actual shaft was bent, like the piston.
Oh, no.
So we were like forever going like, what's going on? Why is this door not fully closing in time? And it turned out like the rod was ever so slightly bent. Like by the eye, you really couldn't see it, but it was bent enough that the friction was stopping the rod from fully compressing, like back into itself, and the door wouldn't fully open. So we had to buy another pneumatic rod and wait for all that to come. And yeah, problem solved now. It's been running perfect ever since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then what about the Akuma? I know there was something with one of the tool setters, and then
Yeah, so I had that pretty bad crash where basically it's got like, I don't know why Akuma used it, but it's like a Metrol, pretty standard everyday tool setter on it. Just a normal like Z-axis tool center for length. I don't know why in such an insanely expensive machine that they didn't opt for a Blum laser like the Micron has.
Right.
But yeah, it decided to fail, and the spindle just went basically straight through it.
Ooh. Did it stick closed? Because I know that's been a big thing with the Metrols that they sell with Brothers, is that they've
Yep.
stuck closed on a lot of people.
Well, it was like its freedom of movement was fine. I think it literally just the sensor inside of it may have stopped functioning or something. I'm not sure. I don't really look at it too much. Like it stopped working, and then all of a sudden it started working again after it, got squashed by the spindle. So that took a while to like recalibrate everything, because then I had to like teach myself how do I calibrate this machine in the right sequence? How do I calibrate the Renishaw probe? And it's kind of like a flow-on effect, and it just eats up your time because a lot of the cycles that you get from Akuma are machine specific. There's not many of this exact machine here in Australia, the MF46VA. They're a bit of I guess, a higher end, more unique style machine. So it's very hard to find information on them, like, forums and such. Not many people talk about it. So you can't really get the files you need to kind of calibrate everything. It was a bit hard with Akuma because they're so flat out with installs. Getting people around to show you how do I use this control and how do I recalibrate in the right steps just took forever, just sitting and waiting for people, to the point where I just sat there like one night till like 4 a.m. and just figured it out. And now it works. So
That's crazy. And was that the only thing you've had to work on the Akuma?
no, I had to replace some of the oil pneumatic lines, so that gives like compressed oil shots to spindle bearings and stuff.
Okay.
That needed replacing. What else needed to replace? I had to pull apart one of the drive units because the fan had broken in it and wasn't cooling the unit down. So I had to like fully pull that out, inspect it, figure out why it was overheating, and it was just a simple like case fan. And we had issues with basically it was having issues with the positional sensor, like the encoder for the servo, because it's all glass scales, much like the Micron. It doesn't have any limit switches. So when it was at full rapids, it would sometimes move past its Z stroke on, say, if you program like G00, Z999, whatever, to take it to full its top position, it would go past that stroke limit and then error out, and it would just do it randomly. It'd run for 2 weeks fine in production, and then all of a sudden start throwing errors. And it took a long time to figure out that it was literally just the speed of the machine. It was moving so fast that it wasn't catching itself. I think it's just maybe a faulty encoder. So I just changed the rapids down to like 70%, and the issue went away.
Oh, wow.
So like
That's
easy fix.
Yeah,
cheap,
super easy
cheap
fix.
Like I kind of just like triage it. It's like, yeah, I could fix that and spend thousands of dollars getting new encoders and pulling the spindle apart and all that, but let's just turn the speed down and keep machining.
Well, I'm really glad that was such an easy fix then, because it seems like
Yes.
it's making some really nice knives now.
Yeah, the knives coming off now are just, every knife is perfect. Like it's how I envisioned the process would be. So it runs now non-stop. So it has 2 pallets as a pallet changer, and there's 8 knives per pallet. Op 1 now used to be 34 hours for Op 1.
Mhm.
And I've slowly like refined that process down, and I've gotten that process down for Op 1 down to 12 hours.
Yeah, you were posting a day or two ago about that you've like
Yeah, so
shaved hours off of a
I've
toolpath.
refined it even more since then. So yes, I went from like 34 hours down to like 20 hours, and then from 20 hours down to 14, and then 14 down to 12.
That's insane.
For Op 1, yeah, for eight knives. And it's all hard milling, so it's all 62 Rockwell stainless, 3 millimeters thick. And I take the edge down to 0.2 of a
Oh,
millimeter.
that's super thin.
So you're dealing with resonance and chatter and warping, and like what may work for somebody else, speeds and feeds wise, may not work for you because of your machine. So you're dealing with like resonance in the cutter and your machine rigidity and your tool holder rigidity. So some speeds and feeds that I use on the Micron doesn't necessarily carry over to the Akuma.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, 100%. Like the Micron is just so much more rigid in its design, and with that HSK 50 spindle compared to your BT40 spindle.
Right. Well, and you've got significantly more RPM on the
Yeah, so I've got
Micron.
36,000 on the Micron and only 15,000 on the Akuma. And I'm using, small little ball cutters. You need as much RPM as you can get to have some sort of SFM.
Totally. So actually, so speaking of your process, two of the listener questions, Design the Everything also asked advice about milling and fixturing bevels and how you sharpen knives in an efficient and repeatable way. And
Hmm.
Split 141 asked, how do you process blades after hard milling to a sellable blade? So let's kind of, as much as you're willing to share, let's go
Yep.
soup to nuts. What advice do you have on milling bevels and fixturing bevels and, dealing with those resonances and then how to sharpen and make a sellable blade from there?
Okay, so I guess it's like a bit of like machining bevels is a bit of an art form in the sense that you've got to be happy with what is coming off the machine. Some people are happy with a certain step over and a certain look, and then they hand finish it, and they're happy with a certain amount of time that it takes to machine that bevel. I'm all about. I don't care if it takes 3 hours to machine a bevel, so long as I have to do less handwork and less time spent on that one knife. Like that was the whole reason I got into milling into CNC was to get away from as much repetitive hand finishing. So for your bevels, you want your bevel completely supported at all times and pull taut, if that makes sense. So the way I keep the bevels straight and not wanting to warp as much is by having what I call like a skin. So I only machine down, leaving like 0.05 on the edge,
Okay.
and then that is like it's like foil. It's thinner than foil around that edge, and that connects to the sacrificial piece of steel that I've got bolted down, and that keeps your whole bevel tight. The
And then
second you
so
cut,
under
so
that, do you have a 3D machined contour for op two that
yeah,
you're
yep, exactly,
okay?
yeah. So I've done that for years now, and that was like kind of, I guess, a bit of the secret back in the day. I was like, oh, how are you machining op two? But yeah, it's you just have that negative or that plus. Depends which
Right.
way you look at it.
So then you have
Um,
to keep really tight tolerance, otherwise you're going to create a gap
yeah,
there.
like length is length tolerance is like the most important thing for me for how my tool offsets. I would love to have the money to get like a Speroni or something where I could very accurately measure each tool because there's a lot of tool changes for machining hard knives. A lot of people machine them soft,
Right.
but I've done that in the past with machining soft blades, but it's just such a hassle with heat treating. You're dealing with warping, and because it's so thin, like just breathing on it when it's hot is enough for it to like crinkle like a potato chip.
So what steel do you use for most of your knives?
So like my everyday range of knives is 14C28N. It is made by Sandvik in Sweden. It's an amazing stainless steel. It's comparable with a lot of people use Nitro V. It's quite literally the same recipe.
Okay, I've got a butterfly knife that's that material, so I had no idea it was very similar to
Yeah,
nitro.
it's like we're basically the exact same material. I'm pretty sure that's what Nitro was based off. It's been around for years, but it's like steel fads come in and out. There's a lot of like knife nerds out there in the EDC world that really get into the metrology and metallurgical side of knife steels.
Right.
And then my higher range of stainless steel for kitchen knives is RWL34. Same steel that John Grimsmo uses in his folding knives. It's a really clean, high, sort of wear resistant, really fine carbide structured stainless steel. And that's my sort of higher end range of stainless steel that I use. And then I dabble in like the Damasteel Damascus, which is made by the same company and uses the same base stainless alloy, RWL34.
Right.
And then we have our carbon steels, which I prefer. They get a lot sharper, hold their edges far longer. And I use a Japanese steel called a Vitoku 2. It's made by Takafu Steels in Japan. I've got a really good relationship with them personally. And yeah, so I use a lot of their stuff and would love to, expand into more exotic steels. It's just time and cost. It's
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I imagine
yeah.
that even if they're similar hardness, they still require very individual speeds and feeds.
Yeah, so like machining, say, Vitoku 2 at the same hardness as 14C28N, that VTOGO 2 is going to absolutely destroy your end mills so much faster because it's got far higher wear resistance, has, more alloys in it like tungsten and vanadium, etc., that will just kill your tool faster than a low alloy stainless like RWL34.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And actually, that was one thing I had meant to ask you about was if you, when you're cooking, prefer a carbon steel or stainless steel knife, because I know I have a few Japanese chef's knives that I really love. They are, I believe they're stainless, but I've heard that the carbon steel is kind of the knife steel of choice for serious chefs or people using chef knives.
Yeah, so I love carbon steel. It's far easier to sharpen, in my opinion. It just holds a much finer edge, so you can go down to a thinner edge thickness than usually you can on most stainless steels. Like, there's plenty of like high carbon stainless steels out there that do the same. Like ABL gets insanely thin and insanely sharp. It's almost as sharp as carbon steel. So like your white twos, blue twos, your Vitoku twos. This probably means absolutely nothing to most people, but
I think we've got a fair bit of knife nerds
that
who
follow.
listen to the pod. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've
so
had a few knife makers on, and everybody.
they're all over it then. But yeah, I love carbon steel in slicing knives, stainless steel in multi-purpose sort of Gyuto chef knives. Like I've got a hand forged Yanagi bar, which I forged years ago. It's a 270 mil long single bevel slicer that I use for slicing up proteins like meat and fish and such. It is the only knife that's ever really hurt me. Like 3 times now, it's gotten me with like visits to the ER.
Oh wow, really hurt
Yeah,
you then?
yeah,
No
yeah. So
joke.
like, it wasn't even sharpened, and it butterflied my thumb open to the bone.
Oh jeez.
So I've got a scar from like the inside of my palm that runs all the way along my thumb, and it butterflied it straight to the bone in like half a second. It was standing upright, the handle was gluing, and the breeze knocked it, and I went to catch it.
Oh no.
Yeah, rookie error. Like, never try and catch a falling knife. But yeah, I did, and yeah, that hurt. That sucked. And the other one, it gouged like a thumb width and depth chunk of meat out of my palm under my index finger, right on the bone there. It just scooped it like an ice cream scoop to the bone, and they had to cauterize that. So I got lots of nerve damage in my hand there from that. There's a lot of knife injuries you have. Some days, you're really tired, and buffing wheels are the most dangerous thing for a knife maker, I think. They usually catch the edge and throw it into your face or into your stomach.
Oh man.
Yeah, there's a pretty dangerous stuff with it. It comes to knife making in the shop. You just got to be pretty onto it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like buffing at 2 a.m. might not be the best time to do it at.
Neither is prototype machining.
That I
Uh,
can attest to as well.
yeah, I've made some pretty bad errors. Tired machining at night. Now I've got kind of a rule that I don't really prototype after 7 p.m. I'll just run, manufacturing side, like production.
Right.
It runs nearly 24/7, and I just sort of tend to it. But yeah, I don't do any changes and such after 7 p.m. if I've worked all day. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, not worth putting a spindle through your table or such.
I completely agree. Well, and like I mean, very often I'm working past then and having to prototype, but I
Yep.
do have a pretty firm rule with myself, unspoken rule that like if I make a mistake, no matter how big or how small, past 9 or 10, it's like okay, I just need to call it quits,
Yep.
like because that's indicative that like the next mistake is just going to be tenfold worse.
Even bigger, yeah. And that was pretty hard for me to learn. Like, sometimes I can be a bit stubborn with it. It's like, no, you're fine. It's like, no, you're actually tired. It's not worth destroying a machine over. Just go rest and then come back to it tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's me trying to be an adult.
It's
But
tough, no, because we all think that we're impervious and
yep,
trying to put aside that kind of ego is it's not
yeah,
easy.
the ego is hard, especially when you've got a deadline.
Oh yeah, you think that the world is going to crumble around you, but it's like, you know what? that customer might be mad at you or whatever the next day, but they're
They're
going to be
not paying
way
the bills. Yeah, they're
well,
not paying the
and they're
bills
going to
when
be
you.
so much like more angry with you if you blow up your machine and you can't deliver anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's exactly the way I look at it. I used to be all about like, oh no, I'm gonna really let people down. I hate letting people down, but I'm gonna let them down further if I put a spindle through the table.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah.
So another question from Tom at Inspiration Metalworks. He asked, "How do you come up with all these cool designs? They are freaking cool as heck."
I don't know. I guess just I have a certain like design aesthetic that I like. I really like minimalism and like a clean look. You can kind of see that with the Gutos, with the way the handle's designed and the blade shape. There's a lot of Japanese influence, Japanese names like a Guto is, Japanese for sort of a chef knife, that all-purpose sort of knife that you'd use. And then I put my own sort of twist to it and what I think looks good as, I guess, an artist. Like at the end of the day, you're designing what you think looks good, and you hope other people think it looks good. And so far, people seem to like it, which is good. So
Well, I
I
love
usually
the
just sort of
pattern you have on most of your blades for your relief.
yeah. So in the hollow,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's like actually for a purpose. That hollow is what we call an S grind. It's something you won't find on any commercial made knives. It's literally there to allow air to pass through the blade and stop suction.
Right.
So have you ever tried to cut a white potato in
Oh yeah.
half,
And you've
and then
got both sides on both sides of your knife.
yeah, and it's stuck.
Yeah.
Like that's just yeah, it's frustrating. And like if you're a chef or a line cook and such, dealing with that all the time isn't really too fun for production. So you add that hollow to it, and then it allows air to get through, and nothing sticks. And then the very edge, the main bevel, is also convex, so it has a reverse hollow.
Oh,
Does
interesting.
that make sense? So it's like two hollows.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
I
if
understand
you
the S now. Yeah.
yeah, so if you put like a ruler across your entire knife bevel, you would see that the ruler only touches the top part of your primary bevel and the lower half of your main flats or near your spine. So you when you cut, you really want as the least amount of friction or least amount of surface area touching the food.
That's really cool.
And
How much in your design process? How much goes into balance as well? Because I know,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
because chefs are super picky about the balance of their knives
Yeah.
as
So
well.
every single knife you'll get on mine, it is balanced perfectly at the heel. So the heel is the rear part of the blade before the
Hmm.
handle. Some knives have like a ricasso, which is that bit of the heel that comes down and it's like blunt. It's behind the plunge line. I don't have a ricasso on mine. I sort of follow the Japanese line of the French have like ricassos and such and plunge grinds that come to the lower half of your knife bevel and it gets in the way of sharpening and actually like touches the board. I remove that so that you can sharpen the entire bevel and nothing gets in the way. And that is right, basically the balance point. So you can take that knife finished, lay it horizontally across your finger, and it will balance perfectly there.
So
And it's
how are you doing that? Do
just
you
with
have any?
Fusion.
Okay, I was gonna say, are you using Fusion to
Yep.
balance it, or?
Well, I have like a set size length that I know thickness wise. I have like, I guess, my known dimensions from when I handmade knives that I'd always make knives to. And from that, I know, say, X amount of blade length and blade width to X amount of length and width of the handle. And it's quite easy just to find, say, the pendulum sort of the 0 point where it'll just balance naturally. And you can just adjust that in Fusion and to where you want it. Some people like blade heavy knives, some people like handle heavy knives. I try to be somewhere in the middle. You sell more knives that way. And it makes the knife feel weightless. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Oh
Because
yeah.
it's so balanced, and it's easier on your wrist. Like if you've got to swing a knife for 10, 12 hours a day as like a line chef, you want that knife to be balanced perfectly so that you have that knife as like an extension of your arm.
Totally. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I studied like quite a bit about RSI and which is like repetitive strain injury on people in different jobs doing, repetitive tasks. I did a bit of a paper on it while studying uni on handle design and balance and stuff because it pertained to me with my RSI and my wrist. I wanted a knife that was like balanced and light that when I cook, I don't feel like, oh gosh, this knife's heavy or wow, my wrist is hurting, if that makes any sense to you.
Oh, totally. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree with. Yeah, you want it to be. You don't want to think about the knife. You want to think about the task at hand. So I
Yeah,
totally
it's all
understand.
about the end product. Like for me, it's like I cook because it's like a passion for me. Like, it's something I love to do. And the way I look at it is if the product works that well for you that you forget that used to be a problem for you, then that product is perfect for you. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So
So are your knives also designed? Because I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that most Japanese knife styles are made for push cutting instead of like rock chopping.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
that kind of how your
That's
blades are?
well, they are in a way, but I've also got it so that it you can do both. There's not much of a point in production making a knife that only fits one demographic of people.
Totally.
I mean, there isn't a million people out there buying a million knives from me every year for one style of knife and then another, say, buying the other style of knife. It's better to incorporate both styles if you can, and then everybody's happy. So, yeah, you can push cut and pull cut and rock chop and whatever you want with my knives. So, there's a flat spot for about a quarter of the length of the blade from the heel forward. So you can push cut with that. And then it slowly curves more and has more belly. And that allows you to do finer, faster rock chopping and faster processing of like your herbs and onions and whatever. And then a really thin tapered tip, which allows you to do a lot of your like finer cutting like julienne and bronze wire and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really a smart way to do it because I know that that's in looking at buying another chef's knife or something, that's always
Yep.
something to consider. So it's nice that yours kind of can do it all.
Yeah, it can do it all. And like they come with lifetime warranty and lifetime free sharpening.
Wow.
Like you look at how many other products in the world give you, I guess, that kind of service. Like, I want these knives to be in your family for the rest of your life and hand them down to your kids.
That's great. That's such a wonderful and refreshing way to look at products. I think
Yeah.
most of the people who come on the podcast are like that, but in general, that is not the way the world works.
No, like especially when you look at like our tech industry, there's just so much tech waste. Everything's designed these days to last 2 years and then fail.
Yeah.
Because that's how they, obviously they're about making money. Great for business, not so great for the end user and the environment.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
So another question from DFM Toolworks. He said, "How do you manage steel chips and having the pups in the shop? Because you've got your dogs all over your Instagram, and so I'm sure they're
Yeah.
there all the time. How do you deal with safety for them?"
The shop supervisors, they're pretty good. Like I keep a pretty clean shop. Like there's no chips on the ground like ever. And I wouldn't even call the chips that I make chips. They're more like splinters because it's such a hard material. I'm taking such fine cuts that it produces a sharp little tiny splinter. And the only time I really have to worry about chip management is making handles or machining aluminum fixtures. And now both machines have chip conveyors.
Oh, fantastic!
So the Micron came without a chip conveyor, and that was an absolute nightmare having to like scrape out chips because it'd overflow and then coolant would go everywhere and yada yada. So we managed to convert a Kuma, I think it's a Kuma, from my friend's shop. Chip
Chris's?
conveyor. Yeah, Chris. Yep, from Ignite Digi.
Yeah, yeah.
He's an awesome guy. I've known him for a few years now, and he's always keen to help, especially with the Akuma side. He's a bit of a Akuma fan. He's got two really nice Akuma horizontals now and a Akuma vertical. And like when I met him, he was like in the same situation as me, like a little tiny mill in our garage at home.
Yeah, I was just seeing. I think he posted a throwback recently
Yep.
where it showed the 2 mills that he had in his garage, and
Yep.
now not even one of his horizontals would fit there. So
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, and it's been pretty fast. Like, super happy for those guys. They're absolutely crushing it in the camera industry, and you couldn't really ask for a better machine for the work he does in high production.
yeah, it seems like they're absolutely killing it, and keeping those things running 24/7, pretty
Yeah,
much.
they're not a cheap machine.
No, no, no,
Yeah,
no,
well
definitely
over
not.
$500,000 each.
So does you? Because I mean, I'm imagining almost like a slurry of chips coming off your knives. Does
Yep.
the chip conveyor actually carry that out?
Yeah, if it gets big enough, actually, it does, weirdly. But I don't really let it get to that stage. Like, I've got a Freddy, which is kind of like the latest cool thing to have in your shop. And it's by far probably the best thing I've ever put in the shop. The guys behind Freddy are an awesome, awesome company. And the guy that owns it is, it's like a family run business, I'm pretty sure, but in England. And that thing filters down to like 5 microns or less.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I
So,
saw you put it to good use recently. Actually, we
oh,
got
yeah.
a question from Alistair Phillips folders, and he asked, "How
Yeah.
do you manage to have so many coolant accidents?"
Try having like 2 machines with like a couple of 100 liters of coolant in each with high pressure coolant. It's pretty easy for things to go wrong. Or you're tired and you're filling up the machines and you take a phone call and forget you're filling up the machines with water. That's what happened to me the other day.
Yeah, it's crazy too because that was. I think I commented on yours that was like the second or third coolant accident like that I'd seen all week. Like I had
Yeah.
one machine overflow at work. I think one of the Johns on their podcast had mentioned that somebody had overflowed their shop or like their machine, and then you had yours, and I was like, man, it's just like bad coolant juju this week.
If I could get rid of coolant out of my life, I would. I absolutely hate it. I love the look of the Datron's like MQL alcohol misting unit.
Oh, I
To
know.
me, that is like that's optimal. I'm pretty sure it may work for my application now that I'm doing a lot more dry machining, but I'm not sure how it would go with like slotting in hardened stainless.
Yeah, I feel like that might be a little bit of a
I'm
fire
not sure if
hazard.
that's like, really pushing it cooling wise because I haven't found a way to slot 62 Rockwell stainless dry.
So where are you slotting on those when you're
Yeah, when I'm cutting them out.
okay? That makes sense.
So it gets cut out clean off the machine. The knives come off the machine and they can basically cut.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the edge is incredibly thin. You can obviously take it down thinner, and you do that by hand. But a
So
good,
actually, that goes
yep,
back
yep.
to Split's question, which was, what processing do you do once the blades come off? Like, what kind
Okay, so
of
they
finishing
come
are you
in.
doing? All that.
Yeah, so they get taken off the machine. They get inspected for any defaults. Like chip gouging. Edge thickness. I measure that with a jig that I 3D printed, like 3D resin printed.
Hmm.
And that's something I've been able to use that can have the taper that I want of my bevels, because it's really hard to like put a mic on the very edge and get the exact spot that you want to measure the thickness. And I
Totally.
don't have any like high end metrology tools like all these other guys that all these really nice shops have. So I just basically designed a resin 3D printed like almost like go no go gauge. And if
That's
I can
great.
pull the knife through that geometry, it's like a V, like it looks like a V, right? It's like a block with a V in it. And that V is the exact like taper of the knife bevel. And if I can pull that knife through there, I know I'm within, a certain tolerance and it's where I want it to be. So we do that. It's passed all its checks. We then use calipers and just measure the taper on the handle, the tang, to make sure, it is within the right width so that it'll fit the handles. It comes to a point now where it's so reliable that we haven't had an issue in months now that it's not at the right thickness. We then hand deburr it on the finishing wheel. So we use like a Scotch-Brite wheel. It's made by 3M. And just basically deburr the entire knife all the way around, get rid of any sharp burrs. It then gets sandblasted. It then gets my frost finishing and then gets tumbled in ceramic media. After that, it will then get its handle glued on. It's a bit of a lengthy process because hidden tang handles, it's a two-piece. It gets press fit on, glued, then needs hand sanding the join, like the seam,
Mm-hmm.
then polished. And then once that's all done, final inspection, happy with the handle, everything's straight, edges straight. We then hand sharpen. And the hand sharpening is done on two machines. They're called a Tormac. It's the T8 version, their industrial sort of high-end version. And a
That's like the
Tormac
really slow giant
water wheel.
wheel.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's Swedish made. For some reason, I have a lot of Swedish made stuff in the shop and European stuff. I guess they just make really good stuff. But the Tormac's awesome. Like, we use a diamond wheel on that. And so one machine will have a coarse grit to cut in our bevel. So, like, we have a primary bevel which gets machined on the machine, leaving 0.2. And then we put in a micro bevel, which is like a 20-degree bevel on the edge, and that is what makes it sharp. And then we will go from the coarse to the superfine, which is about 6,000 grit, and that's a Japanese water wheel. And then it gets finished on the leather. That sharpening process takes about 5 minutes. Yeah, so by hand you'd be there for a while, but because it's powered and it's a Tormac, it just makes life so easy, and it makes no noise. It's like the quietest piece of machinery in the shop. It's quite nice to sit down and sharpen because it's like a bit of zen. Yeah, and then we test the sharpness, make sure you can slice newspaper cleanly. Newspaper is a lot better for testing sharpness than your normal sort of like copier white paper, because newspaper is a lot thinner and has irregularities in it. So if you've got a little bit of a burr on the edge, which is like that wiry edge, as you slowly slice through newspaper, it'll catch on a burr or any blunt spot you've got on the knife, and you can actually feel it. So then you go back, fix it up, cut again, and yeah, once that's done, it's ready to box up.
Wow. So before we get to our last two questions, you briefly mentioned it, but I want to deep dive into
Yep.
your 3D printers because you also use them for sheaths, you use
Yep.
them for all kinds of stuff. What do you have? You just got a new big one, and it looked like a frozen 8K, but I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, so I've actually got the Frozen 8K coming.
Okay.
I've got the Frozen Transform 4K. I've got two of those that I got super cheap and rebuilt.
Oh, awesome.
They're like $3.5, $4 to buy brand new at the moment. I bought them for like $1,500 on the locally and spent like $500 on two mono screens, and then upgraded it to mono screens, and now it's amazing. Yeah, so the mono screens are like monochromatic LCDs. They block a lot more light and allow more light through. That's how a resin 3D printer works. It's just literally like an iPad screen. It blocks the light where you don't want it to cure, and then allows light to cure the resin where you want the part, and just builds up in layers. The layer size that you're usually doing on a resin printer, if you want like high detail, is like 15 microns.
So what do you use for your sheaths? Are you using 50 or 15 microns?
I know for the sheaths I'm using 50,
Okay.
but even then, think what's 50 microns? Like, that's like a human hair thickness on average. It's
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
insane
tiny.
fidelity.
Yeah.
Compared to your FDM, which is your typical Prusa's and stuff that lay down filament, you're in that 200 to 400, 500 sort of plus range.
Yeah.
And they really don't have the same strength. People think like resin printers are like just for like making models and like dinky toys and stuff. There's so many engineering resins out there that completely wipe the floor with FDM printed parts for tensile strength and elongation.
I've mentioned it. I've mentioned on the show before, but we've got a Form 2 at my day job that I use for CMM fixtures and assembly fixtures, and like I'd much rather use that than a FDM printer.
100%. FDM, like I spent so long pissing around with FDM, like trying to make my sheaves low cost. Like I could machine the sheaves, but then they're never going to be the same price as what I want them to be. Because if I've got to machine 2 parts, flip them twice, make sure they line up, glue them, sand them, they're never going to be the same price as like a resin sheath that I can print. They come off, they have minimal hand finishing, and they go on the knife. Like so, yeah, really gone to resin 3D printing, and it's been a game changer because I could print 10 of the same item in the same time it takes to print one. Whereas
Yeah.
FDM is all about time per layer built up on one part. Resin just can do the entire build plate at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty
Uh,
amazing. So, are you using Chitu box as your slice?
I go between Cheeto Box and Lychee Slicer Pro. I far prefer Lychee Slicer.
Okay.
It's a pretty kind of new slicer,
Yeah, I
but they're
haven't seen it
they're-
yet.
yeah, it's very similar to Cheeto, but has quite a few extra features, and their pro versions, yeah, really good. But yeah, in saying that, I've then got a any cubic, what is it, Mono X. That was my first 3D resin printer, and that's been pretty good. But the build quality is, that typical sort of low end Chinese build. It works, but not always, and it's just nowhere near the Frozen transform build. Like the Frozen transform build is like dual like MGN 15 linear rails with a proper ball screw. The Anycubics like this dinky tiny little 8mm lead screw that wobbles and has so many like slipping issues, and yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare. But you can get really good parts off it. You just got to constantly like piss around with it and tune it. And then coming is the new Frozen Sonic Mega 8K. So it has an 8K monochromatic screen and like 390mm build plate. It's huge. Yeah, massive, massive monster. And the whole idea of that is, I'm just like, apart from the knives, I do take on like government work. So I do a lot of work for the police, for the ambulance service, and the fisheries, which is like your fish, wildlife, and game service.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I do all of that work just like on the side, outside of knives, to like stimulate my brain. Quite like the problem solving and figuring stuff out for people compared to like consistent, manufacturing. It gets a little bit boring doing the same thing over and over.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like I've got that whale knife that I designed for Queensland Fisheries and for SeaWorld. And it's like a scissor that is 2 single bevel knives that are bolted together and welded to a long threaded rod that goes onto a carbon fiber rod, and allows like the rescuer to lean down safely next to like a big humpback whale and cut shark nets off it.
Oh, that's super cool.
So yeah, it's like a whale rescue tool, I call it. I sold quite a few of that to SeaWorld and to fisheries, and they use it purely for saving whales and dolphins and turtles and stuff from shark nets here on the Gold Coast.
That must be pretty gratifying to
Yeah, it's pretty
know that you
funny
made
because
that.
like I'm not a greenie and my sister is, and I very much like to rub it in that I save more whales per year than she ever has or ever will. It's a bit of a
I'm
sore
sure
spot
she
for her.
loves
Yeah,
that.
yeah, she's studied like marine biology and all that. Yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, it's worthwhile cause, and it's a pretty fun sort of project. And police, I do a lot of random sort of secret government parts and all that stuff for them. And Ambos are making like these high-end trauma shears for them. I mean, I guess it's still blade related, but it's a bit different to the knives. So yeah, keep it interesting.
That's really cool, though, that you get to use kind of what you learned on your knives, but make something for your government. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's different. Like I guess like machining hardened stainless steel in large volume in aesthetically and also like accurately is not something a lot of people do in the industry. Like obviously there is definitely people that are doing it in much higher sort of hardnesses like Hastelloys and Manels and all those sort of steels for rocket engines and such, but generally like I've spoken to quite a few machinists and like this is not something they do much of. So I
No,
guess you
definitely
you
not.
do, you do get a bit of like a niche experience to bring to the table for some projects, I think.
Super cool. I'm really pumped to hear that. That sounds like such a really well, like I said, a really gratifying part of your company. You know that
Yep.
you not only get to make all these chef's knives that go along with your hobby and your passion, but also get to make things that are just slightly out of the realm like that.
Yeah. And that's kind of where things are heading hopefully next year is a Williman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so a 508 Williman that I'm currently looking at in talks with. But yeah, I guess more on that next year. But
Is it
if not,
another used machine?
yeah, it's a used machine, but in meant to be good standing order, but we shall see. It's got robot loading and it's HSK 63 spindle.
Oh, wow.
It's John had the smaller one, the 400 series.
Yeah, the 408 with the
Yeah,
HSK 40.
yeah. This is like the 518 or something.
Okay.
It's the next one up. Big swing on it. It's like a meter swing on it
Wow.
between centers. Yeah, pretty amazing machine. Hey,
They are so lust worthy. They are
they
really,
really
really
are.
cool.
So the idea of that is just to take on a little bit more sort of engineering sort of style work to keep my brain sort of engaged, multi-axis sort of stuff, and there's a few sort of products that I want to make on that to kind of bring to the market as well that are a little bit outside of knives. Because
Very cool.
I also make like broadheads. I'm not sure if you know about that, but like like
For
hunting.
arrows?
Yeah, for arrows. So like I'm a big bow hunter,
Oh, cool.
and my dad and me have got a small little business called Ridgeback Broadheads, and we're trying to bring to market a 4-blade solid CNC machined broadhead. And we are we've got prototypes done and working really well, but it's been a pretty like complex thing to do because like you go through machining it, you go through heat treating it, and you go through all those issues, and then you've also got to sharpen it. So I'm looking at different options between like CNC grinding machines to building a robot arm that will like sharpen these heads. There's just the sky's the limit. At this point, I'm probably like thinking maybe the Williman will take over that because it can just make the entire part and then hard grind the edge all in one and done.
Ooh, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. It's far away from here. Probably it's a next year thing.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to check back in. Maybe if you get that, you can come back on and we'll chat some more.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Williman is not many people know of them, but when you see them, you're just like, holy moly, this thing is so capable. Like 8, 9, 11 axes machine
Right. Yeah.
is
Well, in that flip up vice or
yeah,
tailstock, like that whole thing
yeah.
is so cool.
So the one I'm looking at has twin spindles.
Oh,
It
cool. Okay.
has a full 5-axis milling head. It has the flip up pneumatically controlled vice. Then has a flip up third sub spindle.
Really?
Yeah, not sure what you'd use that for, but I guess for getting, I don't know, but it's there. And then has a gripper of sorts that allows you to flip the part
Right.
and a robot arm for loading, unloading.
Oh, that'll be epic.
Yeah. Who knows? We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
See
So
if yep,
back to questions. Jody, mayor of Little River, asked, "How many knives have you sold since Australia went into lockdown?"
a lot.
So, have you seen sales go up because
Oh,
everybody's home
100%.
cooking?
100%, yeah. Everyone's like a stay-at-home chef now.
Right.
Everyone's like, I thought it was going to absolutely kill me. I was like, oh, yeah, that's my business gone. Like, I just moved into this shop. Now the Rona's happened and we're screwed. But then, like, everyone wanted to support the little guy, and I was just so grateful and thankful for it. And there was a huge amount of orders, so many orders that I just couldn't keep up with it and had issues with getting supply. Like, we just could not get blade stock in the right thickness, sizes, and tolerances that I need for machining for ages out of Europe. So all my steel comes in at like half a ton at a time, and I get it laser cut. It gets blanched ground, heat treated, and then double disc ground afterwards, and then packaged and sent over to me. half a ton of time. So it's a lot of money sort of just floating out there,
Doing
waiting like
nothing.
6 to 8 months for it to
Yeah.
arrive.
Wow.
And we had a lot of steel, and local manufacturers decided to just blatantly destroy it all with their laser cutter.
No. Oh
Yeah, it
no.
burnt thousands of dollars of steel, and still wanted me to pay the check at the end of the day. That was awesome. They just burnt it. They didn't have any shielding gas running while using a laser cutter.
Oh my goodness.
It looked like it had been cut with a really bad plasma torch.
Right. Oh, I bet.
Stainless, work hardens, and yeah, it was just this disgusting slag all the way along. Knives wouldn't sit flat. It just, yeah, it took me a long time to fix up and change, and most people would have
Oof.
just like sent it back and gone, this is messed up. What are you doing? Give me your money back or replace it. But with the blade steels, it's hard because a lot of the local manufacturers have no idea what blade steel is to them. They're just used to cutting 416 and 304 and all that sort of stuff. They're like, oh, it's just stainless. It's like, no, but it's blade stainless, and it's far more expensive and not as easy to replace in large volume.
Right. Yeah, I imagine if you're already waiting for it to come over from Europe, it's not something you can just say, "Oh, replace it." And it's like, well, I've got to make knives for the rest of the year, kind of thing.
Yeah, and then you're just left now, with no stock, and you can't make blade, you can't make any knives, and you got customers waiting, and yeah, it's been a lot mentally to take on, especially by yourself. So, but we're here now. We're on the tail end of things, and we're almost done. And I'm very much looking forward to having my first holiday in 2 years.
Yes, well deserved for sure.
Yeah.
So his other question was, do you secretly love New Zealand?
Yes, I do. New Zealand is one of the most beautiful places in the world, hands down. Especially South Island. You go to New Zealand, you probably want to live there. Apart from the job opportunities, the pay kind of sucks compared to a lot of other places in the world, just with their dollar and how expensive the cost of living is over there compared to Australia. But it's just breathtaking. South Island or a road trip, if you come from, say, America or Europe or something, I can only probably say that Switzerland and where like Marv is up in the Swiss German Alps
Mhm.
is probably the only place that's nicer.
Yeah,
But yeah,
my wife is in love with New Zealand, and we definitely need to make it out there at some point.
100,000,000%, it is so worth it. You do like a road trip from, say, Queenstown, which is like your typical tourist hotspot. It's beautiful too. Like you see the Remarkables, which is like the big mountain ranges there. They call the Remarkables. And you do a road trip all the way down the South Island. Like you can go from one end of the country to the other end of the country horizontally, like laterally, in like a day.
Oh wow,
Not many countries in the world you can go from one end to the other in a day.
no,
But
definitely
vertically,
not.
it takes you a long time because in Australia we kind of joke that New Zealand is like the skid mark of Australia. It like broke off from Australia, and it's like the redheaded child. So yeah, it's a good lighthearted rivalry, especially when it comes
I,
to the football.
yeah, I would imagine that's why he was asking the question.
Yeah. Funnily enough, my ex partner family is from the exact same little tiny town that the mayor of Little River is from. It's
Really?
just, yeah, Little River is like just near Christchurch, little small like farming agriculture area, and it's beautiful.
How
So yeah,
interesting.
small
Small world.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last question from Kiwi Machinist might take us into shop news and new things, but that was how long before the petite petties are available?
Oh yeah, I was actually just having this conversation with them last night at like 2, 3 a.m. They're coming, so I'm almost finished with all the Gutos now. We've machined like 150 plus so far, and the petties start in 2 weeks' time.
Awesome.
There should be a good product, a little bit cheaper, and a lot more like female customers like them because they're smaller and more petite, and they're, I guess, less scary to look at and hold, and less like unwieldy.
It just looks like a nice multifunction knife.
Yeah, it is. It's really good for like camping and traveling and all that. It's quite easy to take with you in your backpack on a hike or whatever you're wanting to do, camping and such.
And those are a flat grind?
No, they're the same thing. They've got the same sort of design as the Gutos. They've got the S grind function and all
Oh,
the
really?
same, yeah, same bells and whistles.
Oh,
Something you
cool.
don't really see on petties for sure, but it makes a big difference because a lot of my customers actually is the private chef world within the yacht industry.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we're talking like billionaire mega yachts, like
Right.
not yachts with sails, but yachts with like multiple boats and lots of rich people on board.
Yeah,
Um,
with many commas in their price tag. I gotcha.
yeah, prices to them don't really mean anything. So they're my usual customers because they order in bulk and they want to impress their friends and they want something that their friends can't have in a world where they're so used to being able to buy something at their on a whim. They want something that their friends can't as easily get. It's a bit of like a dick measuring contest.
Right.
Um,
So is that where the steak knives came from?
no, actually, the steak knives is for a new restaurant in Perth that's opening up, and they ordered 100 of them.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I'm currently making them and prototyping them. The serrations have been a challenge.
They
Uh,
look like literally vicious.
Oh yeah, that first one that I did, I cut through a lamb shin bone with it,
Jeez.
like sawed right through a lamb bone. It was yeah, it's pretty nuts. It was like a bit too gnarly, so I've like sort of refined it back a bit and just machined that last night. So I've actually been machining since 11 p.m. last night, and then jumped on the podcast.
Well, I
Haven't slept.
really appreciate
Yeah,
the time. Then I know
yeah,
we talked briefly in DMs about crazy hours and burning the candle at all ends and how that can be kind of rough. So I really appreciate that.
yeah. My sort of trick is micro sleeping.
Okay.
Uh, it's kind of how I machine micro sleep 15 minutes. I kind of learned that in the army and lets you burn the candle. I'm very lucky because obviously I don't have a wife and kids and stuff that I guess a lot of other people have, especially in the small machinist community. Everyone seems to be like hitched. I don't think they get to do the sort of hours and get ahead that I can, and I'm very lucky that I can at the moment, and hopefully don't have to in the future sometime soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the automation you're putting into place really seems to give you some of that time back. Thankfully.
Yeah, and that's like kind of how I've always looked at it is like you've got to invest in automation in some form to buy your time back. Otherwise, you become just a slave to the machine, like loading it, unloading it. Now, all my machines will have chip conveyors. It'll have proper, accurate tool measurement and ways to load it offline. So that Akuma allows me to load knives and unload knives while the other pallet's machining. So in theory, it shouldn't have to stop. It just keeps machining, much like a horizontal.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Well, that anything else new shop news in the works? I mean, you talked about a possible Willamette in the future here, and
Yep.
you're working on these steak knives. Anything else coming out soon that you want to plug?
The big tomahawk. You may have
Oh,
seen photos of, maybe not. I tend not to post like my military and hunting sort of stuff to 50/50 knives because obviously, like, I guess there's vegetarians and animal groups and all that don't like that sort of stuff. So I post to my Inyati Blades Instagram page every now and again, and I'm making a one-piece fighting axe for the military and for, I guess, civilians. And it's pretty gnarly looking. That's coming in January.
ooh, cool. Well, I will definitely have to find a picture of that.
Yeah, so we're making it for in partnership with my friend's company called Pathfinders Outdoors. He's ex-army like me, and we all kind of just, I guess, all us ex-army guys just kind of look after each other in business and support each other.
As it should be. Totally.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, cool. That takes me to the last question I ask every guest, which
Yep.
is, what did you research this week? It can be anything, but what have you been deep diving into?
The 6-axis robot arm that I'm about to build. So there's plans for it online. You can buy plans for it and such, and I just want to make a few changes. But my idea is to replace the need to hand sharpen knives
Oh, okay.
at volume.
Is this the Anon robot or
Which one, sorry?
the AR3?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the one I'm
Uh,
looking at building. Yep.
okay, yeah,
Yep. They
I've
are
done
three.
quite a look into it.
Yeah.
I've looked quite into it.
Like costed it out. I'm like, oh, is it easier just to buy the parts machined? Should I machine them myself? Yada yada. Because with shipping from the States to Australia, we get absolutely raped on price and
Right.
import tax, and yeah, obviously our dollar is not as high. But yeah,
I would
looking into
imagine the
that.
steppers and stuff you can get from China pretty easily and cheaply.
Yeah, but I'd want to kind of put, I think, like ClearPath servers or something like that in it. So there's more sort of, I guess, positional feedback, missteps and stuff. But yeah, the idea is that it would then sharpen knives in higher volumes, like, say, overnight. You'd set up a rack of knives and it would select the knives and sort of sharpen them on the water wheel. The water wheel is just such a low cost, low risk form of sharpening. You never have to worry about the edges burning. You don't have to worry about, like, say, belts or whatever catching, breaking, wearing. The stone just continually, slowly wears down. And yeah, set up X amount of knives and just let it sharpen overnight. That's kind of the 2022 goal.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've looked quite a bit into the AR3 just because it looked like a fun project.
Yep.
And yeah, I feel like if I do build one eventually, I'll probably buy the hardware kit.
Yep.
But the aluminum parts, they seem fairly easy, so I'll probably make them just for the fun of it.
Yeah, it's just that like time versus cost. It's always cheaper to make your own parts in theory, but I'm slowly learning that actually, like, leave the machines to make money and just buy the parts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Spend
I
your
mean,
time
that's
assembling.
the entrepreneur's struggle. I feel like for everybody in this
Yep.
business is like, but I want to make everything, and it's like,
Exactly.
yeah, but should you like?
Exactly. Yeah. I think John Grimsmo, I was speaking to him, he suffers from the same thing. Wants to make everything, tweak everything, have his hands on everything, but then doesn't have the time in the day, and then he's just like, oh man, I should have just bought the thing and
Yeah.
focused on making knives.
I would seriously question a machinist's resolve if they didn't at least struggle with that behind the scenes.
Yep.
I'd be like, who are you actually? Like,
Yeah, and the hardest thing is also, like, you've got all the tools, all the know-how to make those simple, plate parts, but then it's a bit of like, what's the quality like coming from this place? Is like, could I do better? Is it really actually worth my time to do better, or does it just work how it's meant to work anyway?
yeah, definitely.
And then the last thing is building a sort of high-speed gantry router
For handle materials?
Yeah, purely handle materials. Because at the moment, I'm machining the handles in the Micron, and it does obviously like an amazing job, but it just seems dumb to be using a Micron to machine handles.
Right. Yeah,
Like,
a little bit of an
think about it.
overkill.
Yeah, it's like insane overkill for machining corian and aluminum. So the idea is to probably build my own, because I kind of want it nice and fast and high acceleration, and probably using some sort of misting coolant system. Looking at like buying a epoxy granite base from, say, China or something, and then building the rest myself. Very much like a sort of a Datron M8 style.
Mhm.
Yep, maybe a little bit smaller. But yeah, I would love to buy a Datron, but holy moly, the prices on those are just crazy.
Yeah, they are like big, full industrial CNC prices. I don't know what the price works out to there, but like a Neo is more or less the same as what I paid for my Speedio.
Yeah, wow.
So it's
It's
like,
nuts, hey?
yeah. I mean, I guess if I like had this very specific work for it, I
Yep.
had Eddie Kramer on, and like his workflow works best on a Datron, and so I totally understand that business case. But like for
Yep.
me, there's no way I could run my business on a Neo.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. You need that sort of flexibility between smaller and larger parts and part height.
Yeah,
Yep.
precisely.
It would be pretty nice to run those machines. I love the control design. I feel
Same.
like they could teach a lot of machine builders, how to make a control that's like user friendly.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Like
being able to draw where you want probing and
insane.
things like
Like
that.
how is that not a thing?
Yeah,
Why
it's so
Homeland is not
cool.
coming with that sort of stuff? And vision systems and I mean,
Yeah,
like it just seems like such a that makes so much sense. Why is this not a typical thing? But yeah, I know. I guess it's very much unique to Datron.
yeah. I think we'll get there. I mean, I think as younger and younger people get into machining, they'll be forced to kind of reinvent themselves like that. But yeah, it is frustrating, watching all these Neo people or Datron people just like have such ease of use and be able to,
Oh,
flick
and
a
that's
screen and move around their enclosure.
and I totally see that. Like in a prototype environment, like say you're one man prototyping, machine shop doing sort of high accuracy small parts. That Neo is just insane. So
Yeah,
good for like quick fixture change outs, part, probing. You don't need to. I guess like probing in the Akuma with the OMP60 Renshaw probe is like I can't just like call that probe up and probe via Fusion. I've got to buy all this extra software and it's real dinky and it's slow and like it's easy just to like jog it over and like get it to run the probing cycle, but it's nothing like the Neo where you just get to draw on it and it just probes it and it's done.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely see why there's a lot of labs that buy them, a lot of
Yep.
engineering labs, because it just makes sense. Like,
Yep. No one has to
you
be a machinist to be able to use it.
exactly, yeah. And like you had mentioned earlier in the podcast, like being able to pull a part out and it's not only not dripping in oil, but it's clean. Like
Yep.
that's amazing.
Amazing. Yep. Like looking after coolant is a full-time job in my
Yeah,
opinion. Like we filter the coolant in both machines with the Freddy every week. Some weeks where like we get real slack and we should and we don't, and then we pay for it like the following week because those fine chips really build up and block filters. But yeah, you've got to like constantly maintain it. And here in the heat of Australia, like we have coolant evaporate so fast, like probably just like Texas and stuff. Sort of temps, like it's like 40+ degrees here in summer in Australia, Celsius. Like
right.
shit's
Yeah,
hot.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah. I
you're
mean,
filling
I'm
up
right
at
there with
least
you.
once a day. It's like it gets really expensive maintaining coolant in the shop, and there's no like perfect system for it. I mean, I saw John built a sort of like a refilling sort of gizmo that he printed and designed, and that's pretty geeky and cool. But there's nothing really off the shelf that I found that is affordable for maintaining a coolant and keeping it clean and filtered and like that one-stop shop.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only affordable is really the key word there, because I found two systems so far that do it for you. But the last time I checked, I think it was a Swiss company, the one that I looked at. Man, I want to say it was 18 or 20 grand a machine
Yeah,
to
it's
have their
nuts.
like auto filler with like the, check concentration and fill it to the right constant. It was just like, no, like no, I can hire somebody for two machines worth. Like I can hire somebody just to do coolant then.
Yeah, 100%. And like I totally understand in those big sort of like aerospace shops where time is money and, they have an unlimited sort of budget. Awesome. I would love to be at that stage where I can get those things that solve a problem and I don't need to think about it ever again. Unfortunately, we're just the little dudes on the block and we have to sort of mix and mash things together and go from there. But I
Yep.
just feel like there's really no good coolant filter oil to chip separation sort of machines out there. Like you've got the next gen, but the pumps break on those things all the time.
It's garbage. Yeah, we replaced ours with a little giant pump, like I think within the first month or something like
Yeah.
that.
And like here, they're like nearly 2 grand, 3 grand for that system.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that
And when you look
becomes
at it, it's like
unattainable.
a little water pump and some plastic like housing. And the prices that we get absolutely gouged by resellers here in Australia to like 60%, 70% markups. It's nuts. So stuff like that just really, it affects your monthly, weekly cash flow to be able to implement that just to look after coolant.
Yeah, and it's really like it solves your oil problem, but it doesn't solve your chip problem. Like then
Yep.
you still have to have a chip, some sort of filtering.
Yep.
That is a problem I'm currently going through is trying to figure out what I want to implement on both of my brothers because I can tell like when there's a lot of fine chips in the fluid and surface finishes start degrading and all that.
Yep. The only thing I've really found that works the best is using the Freddy,
Right.
but it's a manual process. That's the only thing. You got to sit there and vacuum out the entire tank, vacuum up all the chips, return the clean coolant. Yeah, that takes, what, I don't know, start to finish, it can take anywhere between 10 and half an hour. But generally, the machine's, not running. Yeah, that's okay in a non-production environment, but it's that, I guess, that lazy factor in me as well. Is like, I just want something that's running in the background that maintains this, and I don't need to think about it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. Like, and you've got to balance, like you said, cost too. Like, I think it's a 10 micron filter on the Speedios for their spindle washdown. You actually
Yep.
commented on Ben's post of his, new nozzle for it, but I wanted to add one of those in line with my coolant, but I want to say they were $800 or $900 a piece.
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
and it's like, man, it's just like a housing with a paper filter in it. Like, really? Like, does it need to be $1,000 almost?
Yeah, I feel like just everything in the machining world is just like way more expensive than any other industry. It's like we are always having to buy the snap-on version tools of everything for the
Yeah.
machining world. Everything
Yeah,
just has
exactly.
that premium price tag because it's the machining world. Like they think that like all these shops have millions of dollars spare to spend on, $1,000 filters.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, even I think Grimsmo came up with his own, big master homebrew filter, and that thing was still $600 or something like that. But
Yep.
it's like, that might be the budget thing for me, and I might end up just having to do that
Yep.
because I want it filtered, but it's a lot.
Yeah, so basically I just got around with like I make I guess a like clean area of the tank where the coolant is sucked out by the coolant pump from.
Hmm.
And I basically just have two gate filters. So I've reused like the Freddy vacuum bags. They're like super cheap, like a couple of bucks for this like reusable big bag filter. And I just cut that up and it basically just gets like elastic band over like a steel grate. And I have like double filters. So, you get your like 100 microns and then down to 5 microns. And that just basically keeps the dirty side and a clean side. And that seems to be working extremely well. Like to the point that I'm not getting chips through my coolant pumps anymore. And it's a pretty low cost, low tech solution.
Hmm.
So because it's like a double filter, you can clean out the coarse filter, say the 100 micron. You can just pull it up, brush the chips off, or whatever you want, wash the chips off into the bin, and then return it, and then pick up the clean one, wash that out, clean it, and return it without getting chips into your clean area, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's smart. I like that.
Yeah, it's like low tech. It seems to be working really good for our process to the point where we used to have surface issues, especially with the high pressure coolant, and now we aren't getting those issues anymore since doing it. So
That's
maybe something like that could work for you, like a little
yeah.
3D printed cage.
Well, if you've got some time, before you pass out after this, if you can send me a picture just so I can see it,
Yeah, man, for
or
sure.
sometime in the next day or something,
Yep.
I'd love to see it and see what I can do about it.
Yeah. It's something like a little bit of like steel mesh or some sort of 3D printed tray, and it's just something that because my coolant pumps on the Micron are external to the entire tank. Like everything on the Micron is like thermally isolated, like the electronics cabinet, the spindle cooling, the machine cooling, all of that is like isolated from the machine. So even like the coolant pump's not connected to the machine or the tank. So
Oh wow.
they just have a hose that connects to the tank, and it takes it like 3 meters away to the chiller unit, chills the
Okay.
coolant, and then returns it back to the machine. So by not having the pumps in the coolant, it's a lot easier to sort of separate a clean and dirty area on the coolant tank, because you haven't got, obviously you don't have a motor within the dirty tank, if that makes sense,
Right. Oh no, no, it totally
like
makes
most
sense.
machines do. Yeah. So we'll have a chat off stream if you like. I'm sure we can come up with something. I'm all about fabricating random little things that save you money.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, James, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a blast getting to talk to you and learn more about your company and really deep dive into knives. Like I've learned quite a bit and want one more now than I did before.
Yeah, no worries. Well, yeah, if anyone's got any questions, just my DMs are there. Have a chat. I'm pretty friendly and outgoing, and pretty happy to answer any of your questions. And yeah, I'm really appreciate it. Thanks so much for inviting me on. I never thought, little old James would get invited onto some sort of big machinist podcast. So yeah, thanks so much.
It was my pleasure. And thanks to everyone on the Patreon for supporting the show. It lets me bring people like James on and get to pick his brain. And thanks for listening. We will be back next week.
Cheers.